Hi and welcome to the first of a new series of episodes that we're doing that we're calling Prestigious Pints. We decided to invite famous faces, special guests, heroes of ours perhaps, on for a little bit of a chat and see where it goes, over a drink as normal. And our standard podcast listeners will get to hear the summary of what we talked about, because these chats tend to last longer than our normal episode lengths. But you, our wonderful, gorgeous, fantastic patrons, you will get access to the whole unedited conversation, video and all. So that's cool, right? We hope you like it, and we've got some really interesting guests already lined up, including Esther Derby, Lisa Adkins, Roman Pickler. And if you've got any ideas of who you would like us to invite on, then let us know and we'll try and get them involved. But we've gone big to start with. We've gone for one of the heavyweights of Agile, one of our own personal Agile heroes, the great Mike Cohn. In this episode, we talked to Mike about how he's had to adapt to more online training, like a lot of us, and the way that's affected him physically, mentally, and in particular to do with his, what some might find surprising, fact that he is introverted by nature and has to sort of rev himself up before a course. We learned some random facts about him, including who his favourite Batman is, classic pub conversation, I'm sure you'll agree, and why he's encouraging people to break the rules of Scrum during lockdown. Given that February sees the 20th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto being written, Mike tells us why he thinks the Agile Manifesto is better off because he wasn't in the room. We also talked to Mike about his heavy involvement in the setting up and leading of the Agile Alliance and the Scrum Alliance, and why he argued against the inclusion of the sprint retrospective in the first version of Scrum. It was a truly fascinating and insightful conversation. We learnt what he would change if he could go back in time, what his views for the future were, and also why his dad caused him to be so interested in playing pranks on April Fool's Day. We really hope you enjoy the episode, so let us know what you think. Nice one. Hey, Mike.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. It's been a while.
It has. I think this whole COVID thing shut everybody down from staying in touch in person. So it has been a long time.
Yeah. We'd normally have crossed paths at a gathering or a conference.
Somewhere, yep. Yeah.
But yeah. Right. Well, you're in Colorado. So we're not expecting you to be joining us with our alcoholic beverages today, but we'll just introduce what we're drinking today. I've gone for something quite left field, Paul.
Okay.
I've got a stout.
Oh, nice can. Deja stout.
It's called All Right, Mate? ? So yeah, it's going to be nice and dark.
Like a Guinness.
Yeah, but it's 7.5%. So
woo!
It's been a long
Got a
day.
good sound to it.
Have you got a protein shake there, Mike, or something?
I am doing Icelandic water. So
how's Icelandic water taste?
Just like regular water. It was the only water I could get delivered. I've been avoiding grocery stores, and so I went on to a delivery service and like, give me bottled water, and the only one that was available. So it's like, I guess we're running out of water now too. So.
What's that water that's sort of trendy? There's a Fuji water or Fiji water or something?
Oh, Fiji water, yeah.
My daughter swears that tastes much better than regular water, but maybe my taste buds have just been dulled from.
Really? Really?
I've done a taste test. I've done a taste test where I had my daughter pour me like 3 or 4, and I couldn't tell which was which. Because I had like a brand I liked. What I liked was basically that the bottle it came in was better, kind of like your pretty can there. And the taste test, I couldn't tell the difference. So
that almost looks like a liquid meal, Jeff. It's like it could probably got 100 well, probably like 250 calories in it, just in that one pint.
I'm going to say it's a lot more than 250 calories. That tastes quite sweet and nutty.
Oh, lovely.
It's, where is it from? Oh, it's from where I live, of course. It's got pecans in it, apparently.
Pecan nuts.
Not actual pecans. It would be a bit chewy, but yeah, it's nice. It's very nutty. I would say chocolatey, although it doesn't say anything about chocolatey here. Maple syrup, apparently. Nice. What do you got?
Well, you're going to be disappointed, Jeff.
Really?
And maybe Mike will as well, because you can tell it's probably trying to tell me something. But my wife went to the supermarket this week to buy various drinks, and she brought me back alcohol-free cider. So
Deliberately?
I think it was deliberate. She said, perhaps after Christmas you should kind of, have a few of these now. And either that's a dig at my weight, I'm gaining weight, or just drinking too much generally, or maybe both. Who knows? But wow. So it's Copperberg though. I've not had a Copperberg for a long time. So fruity cider, but alcohol-free mixed fruit cider.
Isn't that just apple juice?
Well, I assume it's not. I assume it's red rather than.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like Ribena.
It does look like squash.
It's just basically I think it's going to be like fizzy blackcurrant juice or that kind of flavor, raspberry juice in a cider shaped bottle, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just tastes like fizzy berries.
Oh, well, you're happy.
But it's very disappointing.
What's your drink of choice, Mike? If you do go to a bar?
I don't drink. I used to, and I never liked the taste of it. I liked the feeling after a while, but just something with my taste buds, it really bothered me. And I think I turned 40 and a doctor told me you have to have red wine at dinner. And so I'd go out to dinner. I'd try to drink a glass of red wine. I hated it. It just tasted horrible. I'd order better and better wines. Still tasted horrible. My goal was to like chug the wine before the meal got there so it wouldn't ruin the meal. And I go back for my next annual physical and my doctor's like, well, if you hate it that bad, stop. So it was like some people's taste buds, I guess, just respond strangely to alcohol. And it's like, oh, it just tastes horrible to me. It's like, you hear that with cilantro. Some people think cilantro tastes like soap. And I don't know, just alcohol just bothers my taste buds. Enjoyed the feeling, but never the actual drinking.
Yeah. So would you have a soft drink or a glass of water or?
I'm mostly a water guy. Yeah. So water, sparkling water. Yeah. I wish I could say I did it as a health choice. It's more just like it's what I like. So.
It is a nice pint of cold water. It is a really nice thing. It's brilliant. So it's good. What have you been up to, Mike, recently?
What have I been doing? Just a lot of the kind of training, doing some coaching online with companies, kind of trying to phase out a little bit of the Zoom out of my life. I feel like I've been on Zoom way too much. And so kind of trying to cut back a little bit on that, do a little bit more writing with that time. So I don't get too much of the Zoom fatigue during the day, but after weeks or months of it, it's like, okay, I'm tired of being on video so long. And something I read about that was that the thing with it is that we're looking at each other's eyes all the time. And even in a person-to-person conversation, we're not looking at each other's eyes all the time, right? When, there's scenery or we look around the room and, now with Zoom, it's like, we all just kind of stare, you might be on a Zoom call with 20 people's eyes staring back at you. And there was something about the eyes being the part that was kind of draining for people. So I've been kind of cut back a little bit, do a little bit more writing.
Yeah. You're kind of used to having a lot of eyes on you, but it's not as much in your face, right? You may well have 50 people in a room, but they're a fair distance away.
Yeah, it's it's very different from the in-person stuff. And I love what I do. I don't ever sound like I'm complaining about it, but I'm a total introvert. And whenever I would teach a class in person, I'd kind of have to psych myself up for the first day because I'd walk around and I'd introduce myself to 40 or 50 new people. And that's hard as an introvert. And I love it once I do it, but it's like, I normally be in like my hotel room going, okay, I got to go meet 50 new people. Right. And it's a little bit different with Zoom. We have like a little website where people introduce themselves. And so, I learned little things about people before I actually meet them, which is kind of nice. Because then when I go to meet them, I know that like one guy I met recently was a master fermenter. I met somebody who was on Jeopardy, the TV show, and they put all these little things, little bios. And so it's kind of nice meeting people when you already know, I mean, just like 3 facts about them, like where do they live and one strange thing. And I don't know, it's been fun meeting people that way and having a little bit different relationships with people that way. It's been fun. Stayed in touch with a few people that I've met in our Zoom training that way.
I can't resist asking you then, what are your 3 fun things and weird things?
I guess when I think about that, when we do these introductions, like I always play along too, right? We go on this little website, we all introduce ourselves, and I kind of rotate which one that I use. I think the 3 that I rotate, it's not a formal thing. It's just like, oh, what should I say this time? One is that I'm obsessed with hot sauce, which is actually how I meant JJ, the fermenter.
Yeah.
But I'm obsessed with hot sauce. I literally will go through 5 or 6 bottles of hot sauce in a week.
Wow.
And, if we want to do a podcast where we each drink a bottle of hot sauce, I'm your guy. So I'm obsessed with hot sauces. I have this feeling that I want to find the one best in the world. And so I'm like literally trying every hot sauce I can find, like hot sauce of the month clubs and things like that. The other one I'll mention when people ask my weird fact is that I'm just obsessed with my dog. I normally have a little button I could push right now and it brings up a picture of my dog behind me. So I love I got 2 little puppies. And then I think the third one I ever mentioned is that I used to compete at weightlifting did a lot of powerlifting. So those are like my weird 3 facts that I'll rotate through when I'm in groups introducing ourselves that way.
Cool. Mike, so there are elements of the Zoom thing, and I know I'm much the same as you, is that Zoom's a very different way of working and training, but are there elements of it that you think you prefer to being in person?
Just the ease of it. And it's been nice, like with doing classes that we can meet, I can have people in classes that might not have been able to make it to one of my classes somewhere else. Yeah. I used to, in the in-person world, I used to train a lot. I would train fairly frequently, but I'm kind of a creature of habit and I want to go back to the same city, stay at the same hotel, have the same 3 restaurants that I go to. And so I don't do a lot of like, I'm just going to boom, pick a city and go there. And I know a lot of trainers will do that. And it's probably a better way to live. It's like they'll pick someplace fun and go there. And I just want to go to the same place, same hotel staff, and, just repeat myself. And so it's been nice having the opportunity to have people in courses that might not have had a chance to take a course from me in another world. We've been using a number of other trainers inside our company. And so it's been nice to get a little bit deeper relationship there and to experiment with some of the material that we teach in class and find new ways to cover some of it. And so that's been kind of fun because it seems a little bit faster paced. And so we're kind of doing a lot more exercises in the classes, and it's been fun to kind of iterate through those.
Did you always, because we always get people asking us questions in the break, can I just have a quick question? It's really difficult to get a break, but I found it a little bit easier when you're online to just, I'm just going to go and get a cup of coffee. When I was teaching in person, it was tough because people would come up during the exercises and they'd want to ask me kind of a private question, not private, like personal, but it's like, private to my team. And it was always kind of annoying because like, I want you to do the exercise. There's a reason I put this exercise in the class and your table's not benefiting from you being there. Go back to your table. And I liked that because, again, you got to be an introvert. It was a chance to, I would just, a lot of times I'd walk through tables, but other times I would just sit there if I needed to and just, right, and just breathe. And it's like, okay, nobody's talking at me or I'm not having to lecture for a minute, and just kind of mini recharge. Like a 3-minute recharge was enough. And the way we do our Zoom classes is we have, the typical Zoom breakout rooms. And what I do is I bounce into the breakout rooms. I'll go into one breakout room and talk to them for 2 or 3 minutes and go to another breakout room. And maybe I don't say anything. If they're doing well with the exercise, I'll just kind of listen in for a minute or 2 and I go to another breakout room. And so I don't get those little mini recharges in there. It's not like I'm complaining about it, but it's been one of the differences. And then the actual lunch break that we take, like between 2 big Zoom sessions, I do try to make sure I get the lunch break. I might hang around for 15 minutes and just answer extra questions, but then I do get a good lunch break, and that's always really nice. And then what I do to make up for any time that I didn't have answering those, like, run up to me during a class, I would stay after in our classes and just
do kind of one at a time random questions from anybody who has something that they maybe didn't want to bring up in class, or that they knew was really in depth, and they'd have to give me like 5 minutes of backstory before getting to the question. And that to me is always the most fun part. I love the kind of rapid Q&A part at the end of those. And I've done those I've stayed after class for 2 hours on our Zoom calls before, which is nice because the timing for my classes is such that if I finish, I have to go help my wife cook dinner. And, it's like, so I literally tell people, it's like, stay on, ask me questions. If you have enough questions, I don't have to cook tonight. And so far, my wife hasn't heard me say that in one of their classes because I kind of do them from our basement where she can't hear me. But it gets me out of having to help cook that night. So I just do the dishes those nights.
Nice.
The thing that struck me actually this weekend, and I was talking to my family about it, is that I don't know if you've noticed this as well, Mike, but it's the lack of movement. Now, I don't know. I was going to ask you, how do you when you teach, do you stand or do you sit? Do you move? Do you have multiple cameras? Because that's the thing I've noticed, that I'd normally be pacing a classroom or be walking around the tables, and you burn a lot of energy like that. And that's tiring in itself. But I found, if anything, I'm aching more when I finish the day because I'm stationary. Have you found that as well?
I have. When I was doing like the stand-up classes in a hotel or something, same thing. I'd be moving around a lot. It was always kind of fun to look at my watch and see how many steps I'd done, and I'd never gone more than 30 feet from like home base, but it's like, whoa, 8,000 steps. I just stayed right here. Yeah, it was a lot of steps from just being in one room. But I have this weird foot injury where there's supposed to be like a nerve on the side of your big toe. And over years, my nerve is like rotated to be under my big toe. So every step hurts. And when I would teach all day, I'd get to the end of the day and I'm just like, oh man, it hurts. And the first thing I'd do after class is go soak my foot in a bucket of ice.
Wow.
I was literally traveling with like these inflatable foot bath buckets. And I'd get mad if I stayed at a hotel that didn't have ice, like some hotels don't have ice. And I was like, I have an injury. And then they'd panic, right? The hotel would think I broke something and it was their fault. But that part's been nice, not having to worry about my foot. And it's been interesting to see if I can get my foot kind of healed better over all this. But I know exactly what you mean, because I try to stay fairly stationary during the class. I do have 2 cameras on me, so I can kind of turn and look at one, or I can kind of face my main one. And I do that a little bit in there, but I try to stay fairly stationary because I know if I move, all of a sudden I'm out of the frame or things like that. Or if I move too much, my hands get in or out of focus. And so I just try to just sit there and stay, but probably been good in the sense that my background's as a programmer, and I think I sit like a typical programmer, like when I'm just, writing email, slouched way down in my chair and leaning back, and, probably horrible for my posture. And like right now I'm sitting up, very straight and aimed right at the camera. And I think it's better for my posture.
For the benefit of the camera, we're all correcting our posture now just to try and try and sit straight, Jeff, straighten your back.
So I think that part's been tough, but it's like, I know like one of the women I work with, she has what's called a PTZ camera, pan tilt zoom, which is actually set to follow her as she moves around the room. Oh. So she can move to I don't think she moves very far. It's just like, a typical, it's probably a spare bedroom, but if she moves 4 feet away, the camera turns, stays focused on her. And I've thought about that, but I don't know, for now I enjoy the just like, I just get to sit there thing, but the moving camera has been intriguing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I was tempted to. I don't know whether you have, but I've been contacted quite a few times recently about this. The fact that it's coming up to 20 years of the Agile Manifesto, and asking to be involved in a lot of events and things.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years, but it has.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. And Nigel sent me a picture of me when I attended my CSM. That was, and it's amazing how time has flown. I mean, the one of the questions people are asking a lot is, what's changed? And obviously this last 12 months has been a massive change. But if you take that out of the equation, what's changed in your opinion?
Well, one of the things that's a great question. One of the things I find interesting about that is the Agile Manifesto is the 4 value statements and then the 12 principles. I always think of those as being like printed on the back, right? But it's like the 12 principles. And one of those is about face-to-face communication. And one of the things I'll often talk to people when we're, doing coaching or training is whether this being on Zoom counts as face-to-face, right? And now I'm pretty sure that the 17 authors of the manifesto in 2001 were not thinking about Zoom, right? I don't think Zoom existed in '01. Certainly other video conferencing software existed, but I don't think they were thinking about Zoom as counting as face-to-face. But I think what has changed in the 20 years since then is I do think it counts, right? I do think getting, if we think about, the best communication is face-to-face, I do think it counts. It's not as good as being, in the same room with somebody, but it's a whole lot better than a phone call. It's a whole lot better than an email. And I think in many ways it is good enough that we can count it as being face-to-face when we're on a Zoom call. And, we talked about the, seeing each other's eyes and things like that. And so I do think that's one of the things that's changed is how we would define face-to-face is a little bit different these days.
It's true. That's true.
I do feel, I find it a real challenge sometimes because when I'm talking about the manifesto in training, it's like, and a lot of people say you almost like you should be trying to tell people that face-to-face is good, but we can't be, even training, we can't be face-to-face. So I know a lot of Scrum Masters that I work with and coach that are just not, I wouldn't say desperate, they're really keen. They just miss, they're people, and they just miss being, they're social, and we are social animals, and we just miss closeness to people. And I do agree, you can kind of get there in a roundabout way with the Zoom, and it's great to see. Obviously, we haven't seen you for years, but when you're working with people day to day that you're used to working with day to day, I think when you take that away, I think that's a huge gap.
I think what we lose there, Paul, is the spontaneity of it.
Yeah.
Right. I read something a while back that said as companies grow, there are really kind of two inflection points. And one was around 15 people, right? And when a company, and it was talking about, like a small company, but we could think of this as a work group or a team. But when a group gets bigger than 15, you no longer interact with everybody on the team every day. Right. If you think about a 5-person team, odds are you're going to interact with each other every day. I'm again thinking a little bit more in the in-person world, but even now if I'm a 5-person team, I'm going to Slack or email my other 4 people. And then it said when you get to 15, you no longer interact every day. And then kind of had a little bit to do, I think, with Dunbar's number, but it was around 100. It said you no longer even recognize everybody on your team. And so I think we miss that spontaneity that would happen with the 15-person team. And so one of the things that we talk about what's been fun about the recent world is one of the things I've really enjoyed. I mentioned our little thing where people have to introduce themselves and share a fun fact and stuff like that. I've been really pushing teams to violate a rule they get nervous about, which is the 15-minute daily Scrum rule. And I'll tell them look, we're doing 5 minutes of small talk, right? Just random small talk. And then we're going to do the 15-minute meeting because we don't have that small talk. And so one of the things I found really helpful with this is I wanted to do this. I'm like, okay, what questions do I ask? And I'm not that creative, so I don't know that many good questions to ask people for small talk. And so I just started kind of searching around on the web, and I came across websites that were things like 40 good questions to ask on a first date. And and those are awesome questions to get to know your teammates, right? And, again, I'll kind of bring my wife into this. I'm worried, she'll never do this, but I'm worried someday she's going to search my browser history, right?
Sure, yeah.
Why are you searching for what to ask on a first date, right? It's it's for teams, really, right? So maybe I'm saying this right now just as support in case she ever finds my.
It's all evidence, Mike. It's all evidence. Yeah, exactly.
But they really do work as great questions. I mean, they're the silly things like, what animal would you be, or what superpower, what's, favorite pizza toppings, stuff like that. But it's just things that randomly help us know our teammates in better ways. And we don't do it every day and we don't do it forever, but it's just I'll just toss them out there, right? Who's your favorite Batman actor, right? Who mine's the Lego Batman. I thought he was the best.
Oh, yeah, he was good. He was good. Yeah, very good.
It was great. And so, it's just be silly things like that. And we miss that trivial level of connection. And I think we miss the spontaneity.
You're absolutely right. And it's that because when you've got a Zoom that starts at 12 and it ends at 1, there's no time is there for that 5 minutes that you've got when you're waiting for people to turn up, when you're drinking, you're finishing your coffee, wherever it might be. You don't have the incidental interactions that you would do walking around the office.
I just came across, because I've been wanting to do this for a while. I just came across a website. I can't remember the name of it, but it sends food to people. And it's not like, send me your meal or something. But what you do is you go on there and you can buy like a $30 or 20-pound gift certificate, send that out to your teammates, and then your teammates can all order 20 pounds of food to have delivered to them. I think like 20 is probably like the minimum. Is they're not going to eat 20 pounds of snacks or 20 pounds of snacks during one meeting, but that's I think the limit this place has to ship. But you can order drinks, you can order chips, whatever you want on there, healthier stuff. And so I just asked my assistant to schedule. We have a big team meeting coming up. I just asked her to do that. So I'm curious how that's going to go, because part of it that I've done for years is encourage people to like leave their cameras on at lunchtime. And so like I might be having lunch when you guys are, having a pint at the end of the day or something. And so one of the things I like with your idea here, and probably why it's been popular, is, you're just the casual, say, let's just have a drink together. But I think teams, we're not like breaking bread in the traditional sense of passing things around a table, but having a meal together, I think, is something that teams have missed. And so I was really excited about this site that'll just send each of my team members, I think, $20 of food.
Well, it's a timeless form of vulnerability, isn't it? And there's nothing more in common that we have with each other than we all need to eat.
Yeah.
And we like to eat as well. It's a pleasure, not just a function.
Well, if you think back to, that's a really good point. If you think back to like meals that you can remember, right? I've had, I multiply my age by 3 or 4 or something, how many meals have I had? But if I think about the ones that for me were really memorable, a couple of them were the really good food. I can think of 1 or 2 where what I'm remembering is the food, but for the most part, I'm remembering the people that were there or something that happened. And so like, one that as soon as I said that, I flashed back on is like my dad turned 80 about a year ago. And it was really inconvenient to go there for his 80th birthday. It was between other things. It was like, I go see him like a month later or something. And he lives at, 1,000 miles away from me. And, but I flew there for his birthday. I go, okay, I'm going to fit it in. And I went there and I was only there for like, on the ground for like 36 hours, but it was for his birthday. And I had my, his grandkids come over all that could and stuff like that. We went to a restaurant, and I have no clue what I had for dinner, but I can remember exactly where I sat. I can remember the positions around the table. I can remember a few of the conversations, again, only a year and a half ago, but it would take me a couple seconds to remember what I had for dinner last night. I'm honestly trying to remember, and I'm not sure what I had for dinner last night. I could, stop talking and just think for a second, but it's the social aspects of it, right? We miss that.
Absolutely. Happy times. Yeah.
I think the other thing that's changed for me, or I don't know if it's changed, but it's, people keep talking about like, oh, the manifesto should be rewritten. And I don't really think so. It's like, I think it did a really good job of being an artifact that created change. And, you give something a name like manifesto, it's obviously meant to incite change. And I'm not really one of those that wants to change it. But I do think about something that if I had been at the meeting where it was written, one of the things I would have argued against, and I'm not proud of this, but one of the things I would have argued against is I feel like they double dipped on the collaboration aspect. Again, I'm not proud of it, right? But the individual interactions over process and tools. Okay, so we're talking about teamwork. But then we also have customer collaboration over contracts negotiation, right? And so I know that I would have been in that meeting going, hey guys, we're saying this twice. Do we really need to? And again, not proud of that, because I think it's a good thing that they double dipped on it, because it's probably the most important thing about Agile. But interesting to look back on that and see that they kind of double dipped on teamwork collaboration, and that it worked out as a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, it could well have been, and this is something that came up in the Scrum Guide recently, actually, the idea of the customer being some sort of separate entity from the team and trying to build those bridges so it's more one team. But I think back then it really was that separate, wasn't it? There was such a contractual relationship back then. I think, and they can't predict it. They've got to write it as it is there, right? I mean,
It is interesting, though, that something like contracts made it into the manifesto, because it's like there's a lot of projects that are not done with contracts.
True.
But I've always been a believer that even if we don't have an official contract, right? Somebody in a company building something that their boss asked for, there's a contract there, right? The boss says, I won't yell if you give it to me by that date, right? And so there always is kind of that informal contract. So I've always kind of liked that was there. And my company got started doing contract development, so I respected that being in there. But I think your point about the one team nature has been a a trend over probably the last 30 years or so, or 35 years. Right? If we go back to kind of like, the late 80s, when I started working, kind of mid 80s, started my career, you would not have had programmers and testers on the same team. They were on the project, but they were not on the same team. And that's what started to change with the new product development game, of putting people on a team together. And I was thrilled to see that we're kind of continuing in that direction of one teamness. Right? I'm opposed to anything that kind of creates an us-them divide. And the even in language, right? The more we can do to avoid language, that creates us-them divides, I think, the better. And so I think, referring to people as developers, if they develop a solution, doesn't mean software. I actually wrote that in my very first book. Was not an Agile book. It was a book on C++ programming. And I had a little like 1-page diatribe in there where I went off on how throughout this book, I'm using the term developer to mean anybody on the development team. And I wasn't using it to say programmer. And I still get that in classes, right? Somebody will be saying developer and, they're thinking programmer, and I'm thinking anybody developing, right? And that's a tester, an analyst, a designer, DBA, anything. And so I like kind of shifting to that type of language where it's a person developing a solution, not a programmer. Anybody on that side of the equation.
Is that something that you influenced Ken and Jeff on, or was that something you just...
I don't think directly. I mean, Ken and I had those conversations going back 18 years, 19 years. So,
how did you come across each other, by the way?
What's that?
How did you come across each other?
We met when the Agile Alliance was getting founded. So the manifesto was written in February of 2001, and I had a project I was running where we brought in Ward Cunningham as a consultant, and Ward did the manifesto, and he emailed me like the next day. He'd been on our project a couple times, and he emailed me the next day and said, "Look what I did the last couple of days," and sent me the page. Right, he'd put up the initial page. Right, it hasn't changed in 20 years.
Yeah,
and he sent me that initial page, and I said, "Oh, great! This is as this is what we're doing here too," because he'd been on our project. And I said, "How do I get involved?" And that was when I met Mary Poppendick, and Mary and I were the ones to kind of file some of the paperwork to get the Agile Alliance started and stuff like that. There are a lot of other people involved. We just did the paperwork stuff, and then met Ken through that. I was certainly aware of him and aware of Jeff, because a lot of Scrum was talked about in comp.lang.smalltalk on the old Usenet, and so I'd interacted with a few of them in that old Usenet forum. So
how did the Scrum Alliance come about? If the Agile Alliance was there, this is all history, which maybe not everybody who listens is going to be interested in. But we've known you since you, Esther, and Ken were running the Scrum Alliance.
Yeah. Well, there's actually, some people talk about how Ken Schwaber, Esther Derby, and I started the Scrum Alliance, and I'm okay with that, but it's not really true.
Okay.
Here's what really happened. So Ken and I were, I think he was the chair and I was like assistant chair of the Agile Alliance. And the Agile Alliance had various programs, like one program put on the conference, another one scoured the internet for good Agile articles, right? Because Google didn't exist and you couldn't find good Agile articles by searching at the time anyway. So we would kind of manually find them, post a repository.
Yeah.
And Agile Alliance had another program that was started by a guy named Brian Zarnett called the Scrum Alliance. And so Brian started it, and he quickly emailed Ken and me and said, "Hey, you guys should be involved in this." And we're like, "Yeah, awesome, great." And so technically Brian started it, and then Ken and I joined, I don't know, like literally days later. And it started as a subset of the Agile Alliance. It was called a program in the Agile Alliance. And what we realized is that we wanted to collect money in the Scrum Alliance, not, to make a profit, but more to like put on our own events. And we were not a legal entity, right? The Scrum Alliance was this like paperwork thing inside of the Agile Alliance. And so we realized we needed to set ourselves up as a real entity. And so that's when the Scrum Alliance kind of moved out of the Agile Alliance, became its own kind of separate thing. Okay. And so that was largely my wife. I hate paperwork. And so my wife did all the paperwork literally like on our dining room table to get it started. That's kind of why the Scrum Alliance is still headquartered and based in Colorado. And it's just we did the paperwork here to get it started. So We just needed to be able to set up a bank account. And there was no expectation that this thing was ever going to be huge, but it's like we wanted to put out our own event. We talked about doing something called a gathering at the beginning. We wanted to gather Scrum people, but we couldn't do it within the Agile Alliance because we weren't a legal entity that could open a bank account.
Do you remember how many people were at the first Scrum gathering, Mike? Is it a small affair?
The Colorado, wasn't it? I was there.
Yeah, that's actually was the second Scrum gathering. What happened, the very first Scrum gathering, I wasn't at either. It was something that Boris Gloger put together in Vienna. And I think it was Vienna. And see, I think he's German, and I think it was in Vienna, but he organized the first one, and it was very small. I think it was like 7 or 8 people.
No way.
And then we put on the one that was at the Boulderado. And what do you think that was, Paul? Was it like 40 people or so?
Jeff, you were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I'd say about 40, 50 maybe. 40, 50 people, Jeff. Yeah, it was very small. It was, invitation only back then, if you remember, right? And you had to have been doing Scrum, but it was small enough that we all sat around in a circle, at least for the first couple of gatherings. We're able to do that. So I think it was about 40 to 50 people.
It's an incredible to think what it is. I can't remember what it was at the last count of the last face-to-face gathering, but it was certainly a lot more than that.
Well, here's what I remember, Paul. I remember it would have been in December. I don't know the year, but I went to a basketball game, and the basketball stadium held 20,000 people. And actually, let me back up from there. When Ken and I first started this, and we co-taught the first CSM, and I remember going out to dinner that night, and we were saying, we're successful if we ever see a company advertise, must be a CSM, right? And then it was like a year or two later, I was in this basketball stadium in one December and looked around, and there were 20,000 people in the seats, and I thought, wow, we've trained 20,000 people. I wonder if we'll ever fill up a football stadium, right? Will we ever get to like around 100,000?
You're relative estimating again, aren't you?
I guess I was, right? I was looking at, maybe the school arena to the professional basketball to professional football. And, it's just amazingly how quickly we even went beyond that in terms of just people interested in this. And I was kind of pausing. I was thinking back to the question about what's changed in the 20 years is that I think that Agile's it's just such an established approach now. And back then it was very strange, and you had to convince people you weren't off the rails wanting to work this way.
Did you like being strange, as it were? You know what I mean?
Well, I understand their question. Here's where I was at with that. So first of all, I don't really mind if I'm doing something different, but here's what was going on. In the late 90s, I worked at a company. I was the VP of technology, and we were doing Scrum. And this company was great. It's a company called Access Health. This company was doing great, and we were buying other healthcare companies. We typically were buying about 2 companies a year, and then I would be assigned to run their technology groups. And I'd introduce them to Scrum. And one of the companies that we bought had these massive documentation and all of this stuff, and they were doing the unified process. And when we buy these companies, I always had these little doubts in the back of my mind. It's like, we're super successful, but wow, look at all this nice process documentation, because there's a part of that that could appeal to me, right deep down in my being. And I'd always wonder, I wonder if we should do what they're doing, because the whole world was talking about unified process. If you didn't do unified process, you were on your own. And so I'd wonder, should we do this? And fortunately, we're always too busy to ever try unified process. And then I finally realized wow, we're the ones buying them, right? They're not buying us, we're buying them. We must be doing something right. And when I got that email from Ward Cunningham saying, hey, look what I did over the last couple of days, that was so nice, because all the doubt in my mind went away, right? I had been an Agile believer, but with this bit of doubt in my mind up until then. And when the
healthy thing, I think, having that doubt, isn't it?
I think it has been, right? And that's actually been kind of a theme of my work is, getting people to question deeply held beliefs. I just wrote a little, I send out a weekly email to subscribers. And I just wrote one yesterday about an old song by the Byrds. I don't know if you guys remember this song, but it's an old song called So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. And this was a big hit in 1967 by a band called the Byrds. And the guy that wrote it played with the band REM. You probably know them. He played with the band REM 17 years later after the song was a hit. The guitarist in REM had played the song wrong. He just changed one chord because that's what he thought he heard on the record. And so he's playing it wrong. The guy that wrote it heard that and said, wow, that's better. And he changed. And ever since 84, he's been playing it that way now, right? And so I love questioning, do you really know the best way to do things? And it gets so frustrating. You talk about the Scrum Guide, people talking about, it doesn't say you have to answer 3 questions anymore. And people are upset over that, right? Like, it doesn't say you can't, right?
Yeah.
Still, but everybody just gets so tight into their views and doesn't want to ever let go. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's it was maybe 5 years ago. I don't know. Terrible with timings, but the favorite thing that you've ever written from my perspective, it was something that wasn't even out there for the public. It was just for the people who were on your newsletter list, which was, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just always think, I might be wrong. Not just for your benefit, but for everybody's benefit.
Yeah, that's tied in with this theme. And that's like, I wrote that and I did a couple keynote talks at conferences around this idea of, let go of your certainty. You might be wrong about something, and, and admit it when you're wrong. And, always thinking my wife is probably looking at that going, you never admit when you're wrong. And it's like, maybe I'm bad at that in my personal life, but I think I'm pretty good at it in the professional sense of looking at things that have changed. And, talking about stuff that's changed over the years. A lot of people will look at like the sprint retrospective as one of the fundamental things in Scrum, and it's not, right? Or it wasn't, right? It was not there at the beginning.
No,
I do think it's important. I don't want to misspeak, but it wasn't there at the beginning. And that's like, okay, oversight. We didn't think about it. Well, I remember, and I think Ken was the same way. I remember being actively opposed to adding a retrospective into Scrum.
Really?
Yeah, I know, it's shocking, right? It's like, who would be opposed to this? Well, here's the logic. Why should I wait until the end of the sprint to tell my team how to get better? If I notice a way to get better, I should tell them that day. It should come up in the daily Scrum, right? And I think there's a lot of merit to that argument, right? At a kind of a theoretical level. Yeah. But what happens is I come up with a way for my team to get better. We're too busy. I don't mention it at the daily Scrum, and then I forget about it and it never comes up, right? And so I wasn't opposed to getting better, but it was like, why wait until the end? How ridiculous is that, right? Convene a retrospective in the minute where you discover one's needed. It's like, well, in theory, that is great, but it doesn't happen because we're all so busy. And so having that dedicated time, and this was to Esther Derby's credit, she's the one that pushed for it, having that dedicated time, absolutely essential to Scrum. But it was something that early Scrum people didn't put in there. And at least myself, and I think Ken as well, we're opposed to. I don't want to misspeak for him, but I think in the very early days, we're like, no, just do it whenever you notice it. Don't wait till the end of the sprint.
Yeah, because it just ended with a sprint review, wasn't it? That was pretty much it, sprint review, and then that move on, just back to planning. That was kind of
it was right back to planning, right? Yeah. And if you, of course, talk about getting better, but let's not dedicate time for it. I don't want one more meeting. Just do it whenever you need to. Yeah. Bad idea. But again, I was opposed to adding that at the beginning. So it's there's so many things that I can look at and say I was wrong about this, and it just gets frustrating with others are like so holding so tight to a belief.
Yeah.
You see, Mike, you said right at the beginning, you said you're looking to do some more writing, and I have to admit, I was a bit of I had some time today, and I went back to my bookshelf, and I've still got. I looked at this, right? So I'm holding up now Agile Estimating and Planning if people can't see it, but I flicked through this, and I looked back and I thought, how much of this stuff influenced me at the time when I first read it, but I'm still kind of quoting from it now. I'm still using the material, so I just wanted to thank you for that. This is probably the book of all of yours that's most influenced my journey from that kind of early 2000s to where I am now. So I want firstly to thank you for that, because that's still very much a reference for me now. But what you mentioned, you were writing more now. Where's your current thought process going with writing?
Well, first off, thanks for the comments on the book. But to me, that book is just another example of something where I've changed my mind about things. I still love the core premise of that book. But one of the things I did in that book is I didn't want to come down firmly on the side of story points. And so I talked equally about story points or time. And just having worked with teams in the 15 years since that book, I'm just much more adamant about story points being a better way to estimate because of the ability for people to agree who work at different speeds, right? If we work at different speeds, we can't agree on days, but we could agree that this is twice as big as that. What I've been doing with writing more is I like doing books. I like that I've done a number of books, 3 Agile, and I think 4 programming books before that, is that you don't really get a lot of feedback on the books.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been doing is shifting a lot more to kind of recorded videos, on-demand video courses. And so one of the things I like, as an example, I do have a video course on estimating, and I can get data on that, and I can look at the data on a particular topic. Let's say, what are story points? And if people are rewinding, I can see that. If people are skipping a section, I can see that in the video data. I don't get that in a book. I don't get what did people reread? What page did they go back to? And I get that with videos. And so I shifted a lot of my creativity towards creating video courses where I can get that type of feedback. And then what I'll do is I'll incorporate that, right? I mean, this is the whole Agile thing, right? If people are skipping a section, it must not be needed, or I was boring, right? And I might try re-recording it. I might cut it out of the video. If they're replaying a section, it's like, okay, that must have been important and I didn't explain it well, right? So I still have to take a guess as to why people are behaving a certain way, but at least I have the data to act on, where with a book, I don't. And both of my first 2 books, User Stories was my first, then the estimating book right afterwards. The publishers talked about, oh, maybe we should do a second edition or something like that. But then it kind of comes down to it. They don't want to go to the cost of re-typesetting the book and printing it. And so, there's things that I'd love to change, but they don't, and they just kind of linger. Whereas in a video, I can just come down here in my basement, turn on the camera, record something. I've got an editor I work with, have him edit, put it up, and I can have it change up in a day if I needed to, but more typically a few days. Whereas the book kind of stays static. So a lot of my creativity has gone towards making those video courses instead.
If you were not everything makes the cut. This is fine. So this might just be my peculiar curiosity here as someone who's self-published rather than gone through a publisher. If you were self-published, do you think you would have changed your books over time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things in being self-published, is that you can do that. I mean, have you gone back and changed some of yours?
Well, I'm about to.
Yeah.
And I have little bits here and there, but nothing absolutely core. So I'm going back to Scrum Mastery now and adding, because a lot's changed in 7 years, right? The Scrum Master challenges are a little bit different and we know a little bit more. And you've learned new advice. So I want to go in there and I want to recommend this, or, I want to give 2 more options here. And I mean, there's still a burden to that. I think it's higher in a book than a video, oddly, into publishing the book. You got to edit it. That's no big deal. Write it, edit it, put it in there. But then you got to get the PDFs, get them into places. Generating ebooks isn't always the most straightforward process. And so, you're not going to go in there like, oh, I noticed a typo, let me go fix that. Every time you find a typo, you go fix it. I've got a few authors whose books I've bought, and then I get updates when they change things, and it's like, oh, I better look at what they changed. And it's like, they're sending me like one a month or something. It's like, I'm not going to read your book monthly, right? And so you want to kind of batch some of those things, but I do think it's still a burden. But at least you, as a self-published author, you have that option. Right. And I think that's one of the great things about self-publishing. You get to decide if you want to make the change. Yeah. Yeah. I was about to say something then, and I'm thinking, well, how would I answer that? And I guess it was, so when I get asked about this Agile 20 Manifesto 20-year thing, my initial response is to think about how things have got better, and things have got better. Technology's advanced and our understanding's advanced, and it's become more accepted and normal, and we don't have to battle as much as we used to, or at least we're battling different things. But also there's that balanced side of me that thinks, well, have some things got worse? Is there anything that we miss from what, maybe it's just getting older, the good old days. I'm starting to think of, rose tinted glasses. Is there anything that you miss about 20 years ago? Apart from your bench press PBs?
I think about that in terms of, I do miss, let me change how I would say that. I remember being part of a startup that grew very quickly from 100 people to 1,200 people. And while that was happening, and then we had our IPO, and it was just this amazing time in my career. And I was always too busy to just kind of take an hour someday and just like appreciate the good fortune that I had and what we were doing with that company. And so these days when I meet somebody who's part of a company that's growing that quickly, I give them that old kind of, grandfatherly advice of like, just appreciate what you're in. You're going to work at one or two of these type of companies in your career, and just take a moment just appreciate the magic of being at this company while it's going through the period you're at right now. And I think I would go back and look at the growth that was going to come about from Agile and be able to go back and do it with a little bit more appreciation of where it was going to go and just what we were doing, right? And how promoting Scrum and Agile values has really kind of in some ways rocked the world, not the whole world, but a small part of the world, and the effect that we've had on how products are developed, not just even software. And, think about, how far we've gone beyond my standing in a basketball arena and going, wow, we've trained 20,000 people, right? And I don't know what the Scrum Alliance trains now, but that's probably a month or a quarter, right? And, to appreciate the impact that we're having on the world, because now it's big and it's already had a lot of that impact, and I hope it has more. But to just go back and think about the revolution that was starting with that and appreciate it a little bit more. I miss a little bit of being on the start of that again, where we were 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that sort of startup mentality type thing. I'm a starter rather than a completer finisher in many ways. I like that, challenging the status quo and being a little bit weird and being a little bit naughty, and that certainly motivated me a lot when I was at BT and one of the first Scrum Masters there.
I think, Jeff, just to come in on that, I think Mike's right, and I think we're quite happy to admit to it now that we were not worn down is the wrong word, but there was a lot of resistance in the early days at BT, especially early 2000s. We felt like we were pushing hard against a tide of skepticism. But if you can take that energy that's, like you said, Mike, that's been created now since then, it's like it would just completely, kind of roll over a lot of companies that think, well, this is the way we do things. This is the way the industry has evolved. Get with it and just go with it. A lot of that energy initially was exhausting because you were just fighting against a culture which wasn't ready for it.
But with that sense of perspective that you're talking about there, Mike, it's a little bit easier. If you can get that advice over to those people and they have the capacity for that perspective, then that enjoyment of the actual journey rather than the actual destination is huge, right?
That's a good point. That's, if I think back on, like being part of that company that went from 100 to 1,200 and then the IPO, thinking about that, it was like, we're focused on an end instead of enjoying the ride. And there's a lot to enjoy when you're part of something that's changing how people build software, or, growing a company that gets to an IPO level, and to enjoy some of that journey instead of just be focused on the end, I think is huge. And, I didn't appreciate that enough. I'm not that type of person. I get very goal oriented and I just get focused on the goal, and I don't take the time back to appreciate things. And I think if I could go back, that would be something I would like to go back in time and just enjoy what we were doing at the time a little bit more. Yeah.
This is the point of the podcast where we start getting a little philosophical because we're sort of a pint and a half in. But if we did go back and we were appreciating the journey, would we have actually had the energy to actually make the change that we did, because we would have just been sitting back and enjoying ourselves so much?
I wondered that as I said that, but I mean, would that enjoyment have created more energy? Right. Yeah. Would we have been more appreciative of the journey and that focused even harder on achieving the goal? Or maybe we can't work any harder to achieve a goal of promoting Scrum around the world, but would our appreciation turned into enthusiasm and that been infectious and other people got excited about it, right? And they wouldn't have had to fight as hard.
Yeah.
I think today we're not fighting against, my company does waterfall or no process at all, but we're fighting against really bad Agile in places, right? Yeah. And so people that come in and want to do it well, they're having to fight against bosses who think they're Agile because they have stand-ups, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do we create the energy to help them fight those battles, right? Because there's always going to be these change resistance people, right? People who are opposed to that. And how do we get past them no matter what their current process is?
Yeah. So what's the focus of your current writing right now? Are you allowed to say or not?
I don't know. I'm kind of all over the board on stuff that I'm doing. I'm just trying to collect my thoughts on I think I have like 50 different topics that I would love to kind of create courses on or something like that. And so I'm just kind of across all of those things right now. And I'll get that figured out next month. I normally would have done this like in December, figured out my focus for the coming year, but I had some, just kind of extra hassles during 2020 at the end. And so I'll probably get it figured out by next month and figure out what I want to do, my goals for the year. Cause I normally set up annual and quarterly goals for the business. And so I'll get that organized. I just haven't done it yet.
Are you at a point now where you can sort of focus on what Mike enjoys, or because I don't know you that well, but I know you a bit for a while.
Yeah.
I know that you've done a lot.
You work very hard, Mike. Yeah.
When Paul and I were at BT, we used to say, how the hell does Mike have the time to reply to all of these forum questions?
At like 3 a.m, it's like he must be asleep. Surely
how is he doing this? You sort of I think for a while you put, certainly the impression was you put your energies into what the community wanted you to put your energies into. Is that still the case, or are you focusing on what you enjoy and what you think is important now?
I think I always have. I mean, to me, it was about, creating this movement, and it was remembering the era when, there were a dozen people in the world who were doing Scrum, right? There was Jeff Sutherland with his Easel group in the mid to late 90s. I was doing this with a company in California, the one I mentioned that grew from 100 to 1,200. And, we all would have fit in one room easily. Everybody doing Scrum would have fit in one room. And so when people started to kind of pick up on this, it was just an excitement of being able to spread what we were doing. And again, that tied back to that manifesto when all the doubt went away. I knew what we were doing was working, but I was always, was there a better way? Would be better? Would unified process be better? And all those doubts went away when the manifesto came out, and I could see many other people doing the same thing. And so I think my energy always went into doing what I have enjoyed. I remember the last day I had a real job. I was working at a company, and I was a VP of tech, and our boss CEO came in. So I was talking to Ken Rubin, who's another Scrum trainer, and she put in place a policy that each one of her VPs had to stay late one night a week, just so that employees would see us staying late. And so I got to stay on Monday. Ken Rubin has to stay on Tuesday night or something like that. And she left the room, and we both looked at each other. And I don't know who said it, but one of us said, "We're too old to work with people we don't like and respect." And, I quit the company, I think like a week later, and he quit shortly after that, and, never looked back. And so, I think I did hit that point in my 30s where it's like, if I'm not having fun, I'm not going to do this. And so I do think I spend my time on what I enjoy rather than, and that's why I would be able to do things like work long hours or do stuff like that, because it was a passion for me.
Yeah.
To try to be able to, I never had goals of like change the world, but it was like, to introduce this to more teams, right? That was always the goal for me. And so it's always been about being passionate about this.
Yeah. What do you think about the future?
For me, I want Agile to go away. I know that sounds bad, but I want us to stop talking about it, right? I want to get to the point where we don't have to do this. And I know that, kind of the hot thing the last handful of years has been functional programming, but I still think about object-oriented programming. And objects basically won, right? Objects had to come in, object-oriented programming had to come in and fight against structured programming, and objects won, and then we stopped talking about it for years. And so as an example, nobody says, "Oh, I got to go to the object-oriented design meeting," right? We don't talk about it that way. It's what we do. And object orientation, kind of a good thing. And I kind of want it to be the same way, where we stop talking about Scrum, we stop talking about being Agile, and it's just like, well, of course we're this way. It's just what we do. And, we just go about doing projects, and we're arguing about practices and techniques and stuff like that, but we're not having to have big kind of methodology wars, and we're not talking about Agile versus ad hoc development, or Agile versus planned, or Agile versus
How close
disciplined.
do you think we are to that?
I don't know. I think that happens in kind of work generations. And so, we've still got a lot of senior leaders and organizations that have come up in a very non-agile way. And I'm kind of that way. I mean, I started my work career, Agile was not the thing, and had a lot of success running projects in a more disciplined manner, create the Gantt chart, stuff like that. And so somebody who's had a lot of success like that is going to have a hard time ever wanting to really change. And so we read about things like, holacracy, or more recently humanocracy, and very shared leadership and things like that. And I think that's really hard for management, and I very much would be in that category that didn't start that way. But what is it going to be like when kind of the 20 somethings of today start to run the world and those type of things? And if somebody asks me a question, I can give a very agile answer. I really can. But if somebody just shouts at me a question and says, "Quick, give me an answer," there's a chance that my answer would be non-agile, right? Because that's how I started my career. And those thoughts are still sometimes in my head because that's how I worked for years until learning about Agile and learning to be Agile. But what about somebody who's 20 something and has never worked any other way, right? They're Agile to the core at that point. They're going to get better answers on some of those things. So we might be still at a level where we need kind of another layer of management to die off, or I guess retire would be a better way to die off. But another layer of management.
I remember Craig Larman saying that. Craig Larman saying that we need that level of management to just die off in the nicest possible way.
Yep.
I mean, so is there anything else other than time that we can do?
I don't think so. I mean, there's obviously, make better arguments, refine our approaches, refine how we argue in favor of those approaches, get more data as evidence of those approaches, things like that. But I think we're going to be looking at some big changes over the next, 15 to 20 years in terms of how organizations work. And one of the, you asked about, kind of like predictions or where are we going? One of the things that really worries me is, are we at the end of the era of teams? And I think of the era of teamwork having started in about 1990, and Scrum accelerated that, the new product development game article in 95 talking about cross-functional teams. And so we've had this era of teams over the last 30 years or so, and it might have another 10 years or so to go where teamwork is the big thing. And then after that, there's some evidence that we're headed towards a world of what's called hyper-specialization or micro-specialization. And in that type of world, an example I would give would be something like, I need a login screen coded for my new SaaS application. I hire the world's best login screen programmer, right? And that person is a hyper-specialized expert in that, and they know how to write login screens. And so, we've gone through the component revolution where people wrote components, but we need another level of that. And I'm a little bit worried about it being hyper-specialization, where we get this loose conglomeration of people that come together, do certain skills, and then go away. And so we have, I'm going to call it a project manager because it may not still be a Scrum Master, but we have a project manager who coordinates all of that work and gets something done, and then the person goes away. And so we might have a core team of 5 and another 50 people who touch that project, but never more than a week or 2 at a time.
And that could even be, I assume, all remote as well. With the age of high bandwidth communication, you could have developers all over the world at various different time zones, just for minutes at a time. Maybe, I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what's going to lead to that type of a trend, is where we're going to see that type of hyper specialization because of the ease of doing these type of things remotely. And I think the last year has kind of accelerated the trend towards that. So, and I can look at that and say, okay, this might be a better way to build products, but that's also where I look at it and hold on a little bit too much to the history. I was like, but I like working in teams, right? and it's what, the three of us have spent a lot of our career on. I enjoy teamwork. I enjoy that collaboration. And now there's still going to be a team, but there's going to be all these people that come and go as part of the team. Sorry about my dog going nuts up there.
No, I can hear it. It's great. Is it, what kind of dog is it?
He is a Havanese. They're from Havana, Cuba, where the breed is originally from, and they're fairly small. They were trained as circus dogs initially. So unlike a lot of small dogs, they're fairly smart. So trained, easily trainable, but
you got it to do any
he's
tricks?
A big dog. What's that?
You got to do any tricks yet?
He can do the things like stand up, spin around and stuff like that. The one I had before this guy, I trained him to jump up on like a big Swiss ball, one of those big inflatable balls at the gym, and he could kind of move the ball around. But he was also, because he was a circus dog, he would jump. And so I came home one day and he's like on the stove eating some brownies my sister-in-law made. So bit of a problem with these kind of ex-circus dog breeds. So, but he thinks he's a big dog, so he barks like crazy. He's not very ferocious. He barks at somebody to get attention. So.
Yeah. Oh, the whole future thing's an interesting one. I mean, I get the specialization side of things, and I think this is where I'm going to link back to your previous comment about I want Agile to go away because it's just a way of working, and
it wins.
Well, it does in the right circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are still some circumstances where actually things are quite predictable, quite repeatable, and Agile might not be the right answer. But now people have the choice. They have the knowledge to say, okay, well, in this context, this makes sense. In this context, this makes sense. So I don't need to worry about Scrum or Kanban or Waterfall or whatever fight there is. I just know that this is appropriate. And so there may be some circumstances actually where we do want the specialized skills because that is a repeatable thing that we want done really efficiently. But when there is still uncertainty, when there's still novelty, when there's still rapid change, then we still want that rapid feedback of collaborative, self-organizing, cross-functional teams to work something out. I don't think that need will go away.
I don't think it will at all. And I don't think that, we often get that, where's Agile good? Where's Waterfall good? If we go back to just like the core principles, like the manifesto, value statements as principles, I'm hard pressed to think of a project where those things are not in place, right? I mean, I always want to respond to change. I might be able to do a Gantt chart on a certain type of project and that'd be the right way to go, but I still want to respond to change when it happens. And so I think at a value level, I think every project benefits from those values.
Well, I remember doing a work at a consultancy, which for legal reasons will remain nameless, but they said, well, when I was talking to them about Agile, they said, really? Responding to change for a customer's competitive, I'd lose money. We make money out of our customers getting their requirements wrong.
Yep.
So contracts can get in the way of that. But
I worked at one of the big consultancies early in my career, and my boss would take me to lunches with clients, and then I'd end up kind of being the client liaison on these projects. And he literally told me at one point that my job was to get in there and expand the scope and scale of the project. Make it bigger and make it touch more things. And I said, it's not to deliver the project successfully. He's like, who cares? Expand the scope and the scale of the project, right? That's your goal. And so basically get into a client and sell more work. And that was another company where I think I quit my job a month later. So it's like, this is not for me. This is not ethical. That's not going to be my job.
Oh, see, my initial response when I asked you the question of what needs to change other than time, in my head I was thinking about market forces. I mean, I'm a trained accountant and economist. That I've been brought up to believe that market forces will work eventually. And that was effectively my response to this consultancy, which was, okay, that'll work in the short term, but eventually your competitors will offer something else and your customers will go somewhere else. But that consultancy is still just as successful as it was 10 years ago. And so I'm wondering whether that's the case. But I think, enough companies, and I think the corona pandemic really, really squeezed these organizations. The ones that were really, truly agile in the way that they thought about things, not just the way that they did things. That were serious about agile engineering practices, for example, and doing things right. Then they took to Agile and forced remote working almost like a duck to water because it was just fine. We can cope with this kind of stuff. We're resilient. But the other organizations that had some practices in place but didn't have the principles in place, they absolutely struggled and went back to their default of, okay, there's a problem. I'm going to tell you what to do.
I think that ties with a prediction that Ken Schwaber made years ago, which was that there'll be fewer companies doing software. Mm-hmm. I don't think he ever thought there'd be fewer people doing software, but it'd be fewer companies, right? And so the companies that understood how to build products would get bigger. They'd have more people doing this, be consultancies, whatever they would be, but they would then farm out that work to other companies. And I think about that with companies like, doing payroll. And I think back to, what I've heard about things like in the 50s or 60s, 1950s, 60s, a company had a payroll clerk. They had somebody that wrote the checks to people. And, by the time, any of us were really working, most of that had already been outsourced to firms that were like, we'll take over all your payroll, right? Just tell us how much to pay people. We'll comply with all the laws. And so payroll had gone from something that was a skill in every company to being consolidated. And I think we're going to see the same thing. I agree with him on this, where we're going to see that same type of thing, where we're going to have fewer companies building software, but they'll be the ones that are really good at it. Just as an example, like, a bank, right? Should a bank really be building software, right? It's not what they're doing, right? They're a bank. And are they better off if they could get a good team somewhere else from a company that knows how to build software? And so I do think we're going to see that type of a trend accelerate. Some banks will say it's competitive advantage, we got to build our own. But I think a lot of them will kind of go the same way that they've done with payroll clerks. It'll get consolidated.
Yeah. Makes sense. So you're generally optimistic about the future?
One of the things that I think about most people that go into technology is I do think we're optimists, right? We look at the the amazing changes that technology has brought to the world, over the last 100 years or more. And, how can you not be optimistic when we look at what we've done in the world? And so, yeah, I am optimistic about the future. I look at certain things and I think, am I personally looking forward to that change? Am I looking forward to a change where it's not as much about teamwork? It's about managing a lot of external resources. Not necessarily sure I'm excited about that as the fun part of a job, but I'm optimistic about where, the problems that technology is going to solve and how we're going to be able to do, more and better things. Right. Mm-hmm. So I am optimistic from that perspective.
Cool.
I often wonder, you said, Mike, about this whole agile thing will go away. I wonder if there is a day in the future where the agilemanifesto.org is taken down. Because I assume somebody somewhere is paying for that host that has been hosting it. Is it Ron? Has he been paying it for that long? It must be costing him a fortune. But it's never been redesigned. It's never been changed. But I wonder if there's a day when, if we all just know it well enough, they'll just switch it off and nobody will notice.
I wonder about that with with certain websites and how long do they last? And is the internet there forever, right? Yeah. I think it's more likely that we get to a point where browsers don't render HTML anymore, right? I mean, that's just not that hard to imagine, right? I mean, we're 50 years down the road, right? Yeah. And everything is video and it's a different language for display. And, you probably got a few old legacy browsers you can use to look at those pages. But, what are you going to do now if you want to look at a Flash website?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I none of my browsers, I've got 4 or 5 installed right in front of me. None of them display Flash. I'd have to go find some old copy of something that would bring up a Flash website for me. And one of the places, I can't remember where it was, but it was on my travels, it was a place I'd order pizza and it was a Flash website. It would, pop up with pizzas spinning around and then a Flash thing to see the menu. And I don't know if they've updated, I haven't gone anywhere in a year and a half, but I think that's more likely than that somebody stops paying for a website. Somebody will pay. I mean, I'll pay for it. Somebody will pay to keep the Agile Manifesto site up if it ever starts to go down.
Just one of those things that I was always wondering, someone's paying for that somewhere. Someone's hosting that. I wonder if they realize that they are hosting it, but there we are.
Well, that's where Nigel got that photo of me. He was from the Wayback Machine, wasn't it? Archive.
Yeah, the archive.com. Yeah, .org, yeah.
And, yeah. All right.
Nothing's ever deleted.
We put up a website years ago called Waterfall 2006. It went up in 2006. And it was a joke website about a mythical waterfall conference. And it was funny at the time. It's still there, Waterfall 2006, I think, .org. But I remember when we did it, about a month or two after we put it up, there's an April Fool's Day joke. Somebody emailed me. I didn't save his name, but he emailed me and said, hey, this is so great. If you ever want to take it down, let me know and I'll pay for the hosting, right? And so, that's the same thing, right? It's like, I'll pay for the hosting for Agile Manifesto if it starts to go away.
That is, again, some of your finest work, Mike, I think, is the April Fools. You've done a few good ones, haven't you?
We try to do something fun. That's just, I became a big fan of April Fool's Day in part because of my dad. When I was a little kid, I was probably like 8 years old. I lived near Disneyland in California.
Yeah.
And my dad said, "Hey, do you want to go to Disneyland today?" To me and my sister. She's 2 years younger. And we said, yes, yes, yes. And he said, if you wax my car, I'll take you to Disneyland. And so we washed and waxed his car, get all done with it. And I'm like, we're ready to go to Disneyland, Dad. It's like noon or something. He's like, April Fools.
Oh, no.
That is cruel.
Bad dad. Bad dad.
That was cruel, yeah. And so I don't know. Ever since then, I've just always appreciated April Fool's Day jokes. So we try to do something most years.
That was cool. But
The
just
scent of a Scrum Master was
make
my
note
favorite.
of that. Just make a note of that for my too.
It was pretty mean, but my dad, he's always had a great sense of humor, so I appreciated it. I'm sure I was devastated as an 8-year-old who didn't get to go to Disneyland, but my dad got his car washed. So
Yeah. Brilliant. Mike, we're going to let you go. I mean, we would stay here chatting forever.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was good talking to you guys.
I really enjoyed it.
You can go and cook dinner.
Yeah.
It's not even lunchtime yet here, so I'm still good. So thanks, guys. Appreciate being on.
It's been an
Great to
absolute
see you,
blast.
Mike.
Appreciate
Great
your time.
to
Thank you
chat
very much.
again.
Bye.